Welcome to FieldLink in the 2026 growing season. On this special episode, we have Jody Lawrence joining us from the FieldLink podcast and the FieldLink Market Report. Jody's going to share some insight and give us 2 strategic tips for 2026 on better ways for you to maximize your return on investment for your corn and soybean crop. Be sure to join us on this episode of FieldLink. Hey folks, at Helena, innovation never stops. Be sure to check out the Helena Innovation Never Stop series on helenaagro.com. Watch this 9-part video series to learn how Helena and the Helena Products Group is bringing innovation to your farm, your field, and your acre. Check us out at helenaagro.com, where innovation never stops. Welcome to FieldLink, our first episode in 2026. We're excited to have Jody Lawrence joining us here from Nashville today as we talk about the markets and how a lot of things that are taking place globally are going to impact our markets in 2026. But before we get going too far, be sure to listen to the whole podcast today, because at the end, Jody's going to share 2 strategic tips that can help you maximize your profits in 2026. Jody, welcome back to FieldLink.
Thank you, Bill, and Happy New Year to everybody that helps us with the podcast and listens to the podcast. It's already turning pages on 26, and by the time this drops and we get into the weekend, we'll be in double digits already. It's another start of a fast year for sure.
It absolutely is, Jody, and there's a tremendous amount of news taking place in the market, and the markets are moving fast. We've got a lot to cover today. We've got a USDA report coming out soon, and clearly the headline, Jody, is Venezuela. You can't not turn on the news, turn on your social media handles, and it's all about Venezuela right now. Let's talk a little bit about that and how some of the actions that took place here recently in Venezuela is going to impact agriculture in 2026.
It's hard to, I guess, the extraction of Maduro may be the safest way to say this without getting on either side of the fence on this. Really kind of adds even more uncertainty to the bigger picture of energy. And in a short term and in a long term. And energy obviously is a backbone of all the raw materials and all the commodities, because, cheap gas is great at the pump, but cheap gas does not help corn and bean prices historically. So we have to kind of take this in a measured stance with Venezuela. There are a lot of different things. Their potential for energy production probably will not be seen in the world market for a couple years, because the things that I read and what I saw, that the socialism that has been in place in that country, going back to Chavez and then through Maduro, that basically their oil infrastructure will take years and billions of dollars to rebuild to get to that level of production that they had 30 years ago. And while that's positive, certainly for the U.S., if we can find a much closer ally for oil production, I think one of the more interesting things is that 30, 40 years ago, when Venezuela was a true democracy and running very efficiently in their oil sector, they were a really big local, and I say local, North and South America, somebody within our sphere that of urea, because of the availability of the natural gas and everything that they could produce. So now that is something down the road that we're talking about, but it is interesting to think about that potentially we could have more supplies. We look down the road to late 27, 28, because the high input prices certainly have been one of the biggest problems when you have low prices like we have. But the Venezuela thing is going to be fluid. I don't think it immediately has any effect on our prices, but it's down the road. We're going to have to pay attention to it, because you look what happened yesterday all of the markets generally just shrugged it off. Everybody was a little hesitant when we opened Sunday night in all of the markets, whether it was equities, whether it was metals, whether it was energies. And then with corn and beans, they were kind of in a wait and see mode to see what everything else did. But you had huge rallies to start the first full trading week of the year in U.S. and world stock markets, and energy prices, after starting lower, rebounded, and where crude was $1 higher at one point. And you have silver, gold, and the precious metals and the rare earth metals also pushing up towards their old highs from right before Christmas. And that play comes from a couple different things as we bleed away from Venezuela into U.S. economic policy with the rate cut that we saw in December. And now we believe that the January meeting and the February meeting probably are on pause. If President Trump does relieve Powell of his duty and then put a more friendly rate cut chief of the Federal Reserve in there, you have a lot of the major commodity players, the banks, the research firms, and it makes sense in this that if we get further rate cuts, inflation to some extent is going to come back. And you have one big call that I saw was from Bank of America that said that all raw materials are going to benefit, including the agricultural corn, beans, even with the oversupply we have, will benefit from an inflation play. So that's something to watch in 26 because, like we said, we're so dependent on kind of what's going on in the outside world. I don't think that if crude all of a sudden goes back to $70 a barrel, we're trading, in this 58 to kind of 61. It's going to be able to support ethanol. It's going to be able to support biodiesel, which will pull corn and beans with it. So everything now is so interconnected that it's impossible to separate one in a vacuum and say, okay, Venezuela is going to do this,
right?
Because Venezuela could cause a cross current that moves over into another area of our markets.
There's a tremendous amount of, I guess it's very fluid right now in Venezuela right now. And as you pointed out, as it relates to agriculture, the fuel side, oil side certainly is going to have some impact, but not as probably as great as we think. But boy, the shiny marble there, though, could be this urea play long term to give us a little more stability in the North American continent, because today urea simply, there's just not a lot of supply in North America as it relates to urea.
Yeah, and you look at where and how we get it when we're relying on something that's coming out of China, something that's coming out of the Middle East, countries that certainly aren't on our Christmas card list. That if we can continue to keep a really close relationship with Venezuela, because I think what a lot of people forgot, and it had slipped my mind, but Venezuela was one of the OPEC founding members. So when you look of all the OPEC members that we have, if we could keep one really under the friendly column, then that would have a huge impact, because you can get all manner of, whether it's diesel, because they have a different type of a more sludgier crude oil that comes out than we do in the United States. The United States is easier to refine into unleaded gas. Venezuela's is more for diesel and for commercial production, for commercial use. So it's interesting that if we could get somebody that is U.S. friendly that close, we certainly could see some benefit as soon as 28, 29.
Definitely a strategic move on the president's part to potentially surround us. Hopefully we can see that nation transition to a democratic nation like it was once, and putting a squeeze on some other countries that really do impact our agriculture markets, such as Brazil and others in South America.
This just should remind everybody what a global marketplace that you think you're just selling your corn to Bunge or Cargill or to your local independent elevator. There's so many things from all corners of the globe. And I've never understood that. Why people say corners of the globe, it's round. But from all over the world that comes in to, affect what we're able to get in the United States for our production.
That's right. Well, Jody, as we're talking about global production and the global marketplace, let's talk a little bit about move on to Brazil and Argentina and the crop performance and how's their crop looking right now?
It's looking really, really good. There was a little bit of a rally, very small rally on some dryness concerns in Argentina around the Christmas break, but it started raining this week, so that basically finished that weather problem for the time being. But when you look at Argentina's crop ratings, this really puts it in perspective how good their crops are. We already know that Brazil has planted extra acres, and they've had about as close to a Goldilocks weather growing season so far, with harvest starting this week on the most northern areas where they planted beans, and their crop is expected to be near 6 billion bushels. So we know what we're getting in Brazil, but Argentina also is going to certainly be a big production story because their crop ratings for corn are 82% good to excellent. And while everybody rates it differently, last year their rating was 36% good to excellent. So you can't just say, okay, well, I'm not sure how that's rated, but last year's crop was the easiest way to say it was disappointing because they had a long stretch of dry weather over the major production areas. But this year, they're also seeing really, really good weather. And you've got their crops are going to be at or above the old records for bushel per hectare production. And we know what's going on in Brazil, that we can expect even bigger crops there. To give you an idea, because this is what everybody needs, kind of scope of size, the U.S. on Monday, USDA is going to tell us that the U.S. yield it's somewhere about 184 bushels an acre on, but it looks like we planted almost 100 million acres of corn in the U.S. last year. We're going to produce over 15 billion bushels. Argentina is going to have a record crop, and it's going to be roughly 2.3 billion. So it's not insignificant, because the corn balance sheet, despite being down at prices that we don't love and the mid to mid fours, is still very tight because it comes down to U.S. weather, U.S. acreage. And if we end up, corn is a U.S. crop at 178 away from being right back where we want it. So we know we're going to get big crops out of South America. The big corn news out of South America as we move later into the winter and early spring is going to be their safrinha crop. And right now we just don't really have enough information until harvest is over for beans to get an idea how many more hectares they're going to plant.
Jody, let's stay on the international front here. Let's move across the Pacific Ocean into China. Let's talk about soybeans. Early on, it was all chatter several months ago about soybeans in China, China, China. Where are we landing at as we turn the page into 26?
Well, we're recording this on Tuesday morning, and another flash sale was announced of China buying beans. They're all small incremental sales and 336 million metric tons. The way I always look at this, a metric ton of corn, I just rounded up. It's 39.4 million bushels. I just rounded up to 40. So basically, 336 million metric tons is 33.6% of 40 million bushels. So they bought, let's just call it 15 to 16 million bushels in one flash sale. Their pledge on the trade agreement that was never signed, and then the execution date was moved into February. This should push them almost to 90% complete of the beans that they agreed in theory to purchase of that 12 million metric tons in that window. So it's, and again, to have some sort of measuring device for this, before COVID, they were buying from us 24 million metric tons. Let's just call it a billion bushels. They were buying a billion bushels. And so this commitment, you're talking about that less than half of what they historically have bought. So while it's good because we were at zero to get 10 to 11 million metric tons to 400 to 500 million bushels sold to China, we are still well off the number. And that number is being made up entirely by Brazil because their cost of production is lower. Their cost as harvest starts into the world marketplace is cheaper than the U.S. And those are the things that we have to pay attention to because Brazil on the soybean front is such a formidable competitor that we really have to be careful this year in particular that what does the world need? And I think what the USDA is going to tell us Monday in the report is that we need less beans and, maybe the U.S. needs to plant a few more corn acres than what we think right now, because we expect normal rotation to take 4 or 5 million acres away from the near 100 million acres we planted of corn last year and 80 million acres of beans to bring those numbers up to a 94, 95 of corn and 84, 85 of beans. And like we always talk about, corn and beans in the United States, we plant on average year after year after year right at 177 to 179 million acres. And next year doesn't look to change that total. It's just going to be how the financing goes, how prepay goes to give us an idea how many acres are intended to be planted before Mother Nature, obviously has the last say.
Jody, we talk a lot about this on the FieldLink podcast about production in South America. They're doing quite well. Clearly, flooding the market with a lot of inventory and cheap inventory. And I think it's probably time for us to really, as producers and folks in the industry, talk about moving from the general commodity conversation to how can we add more value to our corn and soybean crops and being very specific. And I don't know what that is, but one of those areas is around ethanol is potentially one of those areas. And maybe there's far greater ideas out there, but let's talk about what's going on with the EPA to help take some of those general commodities and move them into a higher value added product.
That's a great segue into some other news that we're waiting on. And that is, and gosh, this hasn't even been administration specific because I can remember that the Biden administration was just kicking the small refinery exemptions in the 45Z. Their head of the EPA was slow playing it, just like Trump's head of the EPA. So this is what's very frustrating because all markets and ask for is certainty. And right now, we don't know if we are going to if we as a country and as a fuel policy are going to push the 45Z, if we're going to push the sustainable aviation fuel to really become a major player in the U.S. domestic bean market like ethanol was. Ethanol is a huge part of the corn market. We're going to use 5.4 to 5.6, depending on kind of the numbers you look at, billion bushels of corn. So over a third of the crop goes just to ethanol in the United States. And we still think that sustainable aviation fuel, with some tweaks and some support from the administration, and this is completely separate of what may or may not happen in Venezuela and when that begins to come on, but it would be a huge help to the industry, because I think everyone that listens to this podcast and everybody that's in our industry, we would rather see a robust ethanol program, a robust 45Z sustainable aviation fuel market than these farmer assistance payments. Let's have an internal demand engine that uses our bushels so that we don't have to worry about how big Brazil's crop is every year. And this to me is the frustration inside our industry, because unfortunately, this is, if you look at it as it has built, especially since kind of the highest of the high prices in 22 and early 23, this is a government assistance program that if you're farming right now, you're waiting on the checks that were announced. And it's incredibly frustrating, because what it's going to come out sometime in February, corn came out at $44.36 an acre, beans at $30.88, wheat $39.35, and of that, I think the total package is right at $14 billion. That's over $10 billion going to those three crops. Now, granted, that's 200 and close to 240 million acres of the 330 planted in the United States. But if you break it down, these don't really get you far enough at all to break even. I've read a couple articles, talked to some farmers, that they're about halfway there, even with some good sales this year. It's on average yield, what the USDA is going to tell us Monday at 184. It's an extra 24 cents a bushel for corn, 58 cents for beans, and 74 cents for wheat. And if you look at just the projections, whether it's University of Illinois or their private estimates, the numbers added to even the average yearly price still fall short of what everybody's break evens potentially are if you're using all of the costs or the opportunity cost in your calculation.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. The farmer assistance program certainly appreciated, and it's timely. We need it now. But looking at the long-term play, we've got to come up with some different markets. Certainly biofuels could be a solution. We probably need to dig deeper, don't we, though, Jody?
Yeah, it's very difficult, because it's such a hot button issue that I try to stay somewhat neutral on the whole thing, because I can understand both sides of it. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of farmers that I talk to who are using older equipment that didn't get caught in a lot of the tax loopholes of this, have done a great job. And, this goes from generations of doing a great job, not just we did a great job over the last 3 years and we're brand new farmers. But there are a lot of people out there that this money is just going to push into next year, that maybe there could be more efficient ways for people to farm. As far the production numbers are big, but just from the money management side of it. Right. So, and then on the other side of it is, we don't want any small farm. And I tend to be more on this side of it, that you don't want any small farmer to go out, but you do have to realize where the marketplace is in the world right now. And it's changed. It's changed dramatically over the last 20 years, except for the younger producers. You can't even say, oh, it's so much different than when my dad was in. It's dramatically different than when you started. And you look back to what is going on around the world. The Farmer Assistance Program from the USDA and from the U.S. government we're hardly a standalone in the world. All world agriculture by every major producer is subsidized by the government. And it's just a matter of degree. And So that's what makes it very difficult, because if we have to compete with heavily subsidized bushels coming out of Brazil or Argentina or China or Southeast Asia, Ukraine, Russia, Australia, then you've got to, keep up that arms race to keep U.S. agriculture a huge part of the American economy.
Absolutely. That is definitely long-term security and has been for many, many years. Let's talk about the USDA report coming open here next week.
That report's going to come out Monday at 11 o'clock Central, and the USDA puts out what they call the final report for the 2025 crop year. They're going to update corn yield. We expect it to be cut potentially 2.5 bushels down into the 183 to 184 range. Bean yield about 53, maybe a tick under, down maybe a half a bushel. But what it's going to show is, even with slight reductions to it, we expect that what the USDA has found was that we are harvested because of a lack of silage, I guess, or less silage, that there's going to be almost 1 million extra acres that were gone, that were harvested for corn production rather than taken off of that normal 8% that they don't include in total harvested bushels. So that largely offset it. If that's the case, it will almost kernel for kernel offset what happens on the yield cuts. And then you go through all of the demand side of it, just where everything ran and is running currently. We expect some slight reductions to their estimates for what we're going to export in beans. Corn numbers are good. They're not as robust as I think the USDA anticipated when they put their baselines out in September, and then all the way back to last February. So some modest reductions in exports and a few more acres, and then cuts in yield. We'll just have to see how that goes. This is always kind of a wild card report. It's the biggest one of the winter, where August is the biggest one of the summer. And they've had some big misses before, but for corn to rally substantially, we would have to see a yield get down real close to 180, go under 181, which just doesn't, when you look at basis and what's going on out there, that just does not seem possible at this point.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting report. Probably not going to shake a whole lot come Monday when that's released. Okay, Jody, before we talk about, as we opened up here, the top 2 tips for 26, before we go there, we've got one other item to talk about, and that's cattle. The cattle production, there's the shiny star right now in agriculture. Let's talk about the cattle market.
Well, the cattle market broke from all-time highs in over the late fall in October, November, when President Trump turned his attention to high beef prices, that he was going to find ways to lower it and bring more cattle, whether it's feeders or whether it's already processed from Brazil and Mexico. But what we found out as this timeline progressed, cattle prices fell off about $35, that Brazil's cattle herd was also down 4 or 5% this year. And as recently as last Friday, or maybe it was over the weekend, you had another screwworm detection in a herd, and a calf. I don't even think the calf was a month old yet, in a herd about 100 miles from the U.S. border in Mexico. So you still have a shutdown border with Mexico. You have a smaller herd in Brazil than we've seen historically, on top of the U.S.'s record tight and small numbers, when you talk about per capita of what the population is. And the whole cattle thing, we always talk about this. The price of cattle far more mirrors people's thoughts about job security and economic health of the U.S. What does the stock market look like? New all-time high in the Dow yesterday. Job security. You have got the outlook for lower interest rates coming up. You have got the outlook that the unemployment rate will be coming down, or the employment rate will be getting better, depending on which side of that you use. And probably the general outlook is fairly optimistic. And when you have at least an optimistic outlook, you have a lot of beef demand. And as of yet, we've not hit that pain point on price that has slowed it down. And I don't see what this administration could do materially to change the amount of cattle in the U.S. within the next, a year to 18 months. Some of the guys in the industry are telling me. So I think cattle, that I don't see any reason for cattle not to be able to, continue to stay at prices that we think are that in the industry are historically high.
Yeah, there's just no physical way to do that. It takes so long to reproduce a calf. It's a lot different to market versus other protein sources such as poultry and pork. So definitely the beef side of things looks to be pretty strong here for some time. Okay, Jody, we talked about 2026 tips. We've got 2 tips here for corn. Let's start off with corn. What's our strategic tip for 2026?
I think that you're going to see some very interesting things because you've got prepay really ramping up currently. And I think, that you've got some soft deadlines for prepay January 15th. So next week, the end of next week. But my belief is that the cut in corn acreage and the high cost, the tightness of money that's coming, because unfortunately these farmer assistance programs are not going to make everybody whole. The lenders that I have talked to are going to have new metrics this year. It's not just going to be, hey, you're a great customer. You had historically have been, and you've had a couple tough years. They're not going to loan you money. Not everybody's going to loan every one of their clients money just to pay them back, to pay back a loan they already have open. And I think we're going to see more corn acreage reductions, which add some support under this market. Because if we see a planted acreage number that's closer to 93, then we have a base for corn, December corn, not dropping much below 430, 440, even if we have good weather. But if we have that just 1 year, we don't need a 2012 type problem. Not that we're due for anything, because that's no marketing plan at all, thinking we're due for a weather problem. But just a 180 crop on 93 million acres, we can get corn back over $5. So my recommendation is to be patient and sharpen all the pencils and double check your numbers. You have to know what your honest break-even numbers are this year, because it's just going to be another tight year.
Mm-hmm.
And if your plan is I'm going to cut back on corn and I'm going to go more beans, keep a really close eye on any development on what could happen from the small refinery exemptions out of the EPA. Sell rallies. Even if they're not rallies that get you all the way to your break even, if they get you closer, you're going to have to pay attention. Because remember, we're going to produce a 4 billion bushel crop. Within the next 8 weeks, South America is going to harvest an 8 billion bushel crop. So beans are the function of South American weather to the bit larger extent, to U.S. weather to the smaller extent.
Okay. So tip number 2 for soybeans for 2026. What's our tip there for soybeans?
Soybeans simply are going to be, you're going to have to sell any rally that pops up. Soybeans are always more volatile. And if we get any rallies, and a good rally in beans, 20, 25 cents, something that would take November beans back to $11, you have to, and we're at 1078 on the open this morning, you have got to be really aggressive about selling that $11 number. You may not love it, and it may not be something that makes you rich and gets you whole, but you have to look at it, because we know what we've seen. Would you rather sell $11 beans or $10 beans?
Right.
Because unless the great unknown. And please don't wait till this summer and say, oh, well, let's see if we have a weather problem. Because if we don't have a weather problem this year, we're going to be right back in the 24 and 25 pattern of we just have a slow bleed in prices all through the summer and fall.
Yeah.
And I don't want that. So use these winter rallies, December corn, anything above 475. We're trading 463 right now, because if we end up, any bullish surprises, we have to be selling. Because if Brazil decides to plant a monster safrina crop, and with La Nina, very mild La Nina setting in, we're really not in a position that they could have too much of a problem.
Okay. Jody, great tips, great sensible, realistic tips for 2026. And folks, listen, if you want to get more tips from Jody on a daily basis, check out the FieldLink market report on helenaagra.com. Go ahead, register for that FieldLink market report, get a daily update sent to your email inbox, and be sure to sign up for the texting alerts that Jody drops from occasion. When some of those movements do happen, Jody will send that alert out to you through text. So definitely take advantage of that. Also, it's meeting season time, right, Jody?
Yep, everybody is on the road, and I'm running late for one right now, but we're going to be all over Helena's footprint, and it would be just about in every state. So check with your sales team to see if we're going to have a winter meeting. And what we are going to do through FieldLink is put up a couple links for some video portions of the meetings that if you cannot attend, and we are working on a special feature maybe where we can have a little town hall later down the road.
Awesome. And to see Jody live, if you're planning on heading to the Commodity Classic in San Antonio this year, February 25th through the 27th, Jody will be live there working in our booth here, and we'll have some presentations, and we'll talk about the latest commodity markets and some of the things that are really going to impact you in your financial situation for growers for 2026. Jody, I want to thank you for joining us for this special 2026 launch episode for the FieldLink podcast.
Thank you, Bill. Happy New Year again to everybody, and we'll talk to everybody in 2 weeks.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of FieldLink.